This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rattle reporting. Good evening. President Bush today hailed the recent strides in U.S.-Soviet arms talks. He said a major agreement to cut strategic missiles is now likely by next summer. At the same time, the president urged caution. For instance, he told reporters at the White House he would not accept the latest Soviet proposal for both sides to destroy all of their chemical weapons. The president held out for what he called a, quote, certain sense of deterrence and a prudent defense policy. Pentagon correspondent David Martin has more.
After months of being accused of foot-dragging on nuclear arms negotiations, President Bush said today he thinks a treaty cutting long-range nuclear weapons could be signed at next year's summit with Mikhail Gorbachev.
Yes, I do, but I think the setting of a summit perhaps will serve as a catalyst for moving forward, but it's not a given. But I would agree that there have a good likelihood that might happen.
The sudden optimism apparently was triggered by Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze, who last week dropped the Soviet demand to limit U.S. development of a Star Wars defense as the price for cuts in offensive arms.
That's only the latest reversal in Soviet military policy, reversals which are turning American perceptions of the Soviet threat upside down.
Today, the Pentagon released its annual catalog of Soviet military power, complete with videotape. In past years, the message has been, the Russians are coming. This year, the cover shows the Russians going out of Afghanistan. Nevertheless, Defense Secretary Cheney says the Soviets are still a threat.
Anytime you consider the prospects of a nation equipped with thousands of nuclear warheads and re-entry vehicles targeted upon the United States, that they constitute a potential threat.
According to Cheney, Soviet defense spending has increased under Gorbachev. The Soviets continue to build newer and better long-range nuclear missiles and bombers, weapons which directly threaten the U.S.
Cheney's voice is loud and clear, and he's saying, don't do something dumb. Don't make the mistake of unilaterally disarming.
But Cheney admits the Soviet threat is changing.
Today, the likelihood of conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union is perhaps as low as it has been at any time in the post-war era.
And as long as the likelihood of conflict is low and the likelihood of treaties high, Cheney will have a harder and harder time justifying the Pentagon's $300 billion budget. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
The Soviet Union tonight confirmed for the first time that a major space launch disaster 9 years ago killed 50 workers. Western journalists were shown the launch pad and the memorial for dead technicians today, about 500 miles north of Moscow. A Soviet spokesman said it happened in March of 1980 when a Soyuz rocket was being fueled up. An explosion at the launch pad killed 45 Soviet workers immediately. 5 died later. President Bush, the nation's governors, and others gathered today in Virginia for a highly publicized effort to improve education in America. As our chief White House correspondent Leslie Stahl reports, Mr. Bush made it clear from the start he does not foresee any major increase in federal resources earmarked for education.
An education summit with President Bush, his cabinet, and the nation's governors. The turnout of so much brass in itself, a measure of the desperate state of public education in America. Fact, a recent report says 13% of our 17-year-olds can't read, write, or count. Fact, in a recent test, 20% of 12-year-olds were unable to identify the United States on a map.
It's time to stop debating over commissions and studies and set priorities, and it's time to get on with it.
But the outcome of this summit will be another task force to set national performance goals, higher science and math test scores, lower dropout rates. The White House insists money is not the issue.
The funding is truly not an issue. The issue really is in how we educate the children during that process.
The White House argues that overall education spending has increased 30% in the last decade with little effect on performance.
We cannot pour money into something without understanding the results that are coming out.
Many Democrats say money is the issue. They say Ronald Reagan cut the federal commitment to education 1/3, and Mr. Bush isn't doing anything to change that.
Being the education president isn't just speeches, it isn't just words, it isn't just a question of smoke and mirrors. It's whether we are prepared to provide the resources to achieve national goals.
And no sooner had the president sat down for the opening summit session than he got just what the White House feared, a plea for more federal money.
It seems to me that the federal government ought to assume primary responsibility for helping us produce kids who are prepared to go to school.
And that was a Republican governor. Whatever the issue today, drugs, the environment, aid for Poland and Hungary, and now education, the president finds himself arguing with those who say he can't solve the country's problems without spending more federal money. Dan?
Leslie, what sense do you get of the session so far?
Well, so far the governors are talking about the federal government giving them more flexibility. We understand there was one session where there was, quote, a feisty discussion with the president on education money versus defense money. A lot of these governors want to see some of that money going to Star Wars and other programs coming to education. But you know, these sessions are behind closed doors. The press has not been allowed in to hear the discussion, so we're just standing around waiting for someone to leak these things to us, Dan.
Well, we'll hope it happens. Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks.
The selection of Charlottesville, Virginia as the site for the two-day meeting on national education strategy is no accident. It's not only because of the scenic foothills of the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains, and they're especially beautiful this time of year. It is also home to the University of Virginia, founded as an experiment in education by the third President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. CBS News correspondent Richard Threlkel reports tonight on the legacy of Jefferson and how the basics still apply in changing times.
With all the clamor about a crisis in America's classrooms, you can imagine how this man might feel. Thomas Jefferson. He started all this with the best of intentions.
Jefferson was our first and foremost education president. He wanted to invent a new and improved American through education, which he wrote engrafts a new man onto our native stock and improves what in his nature was vicious and perverse into qualities of virtue and social worth.
Most communities boasted but one room and a single teacher.
He wanted a system of free public schools, locally funded, locally controlled. A radical notion then, but it came to be. It started small and basic, reading, writing, arithmetic, but for most of our history, that was learning enough for working on an assembly line.
At one time, in a sense, industry said what we need from our workers is docile, well-behaved workers who just do what they're told and don't use their minds too much.
And so, like business and government, public schools became big and bureaucratic and not very responsive, least of all to parents. But then that's what the parents seem to want.
Most parents traditionally have sent their kids to school and kept their fingers crossed and stayed away. And schools were designed for that to happen.
If you go kind of north of Rome and inland toward the Apennines, you'll find Assisi.
But that's changing because the world is changing. Too fast, apparently, for America's 16,000 public school districts. Now we must guarantee all our children not just a free education, but a good one.
We no longer have people who simply sweep the floors. They have to know technical machinery. They have to know technical language. If we do not have an educated workforce, this nation profoundly will decline economically and will become second and third rate.
So in this rush to get ready for the world of tomorrow, how do our kids stack up with other kids? The Japanese say. The people who ought to know are alarmed.
Although we spend as much money, in fact rather more, than other developed countries per pupil on education, our results have been the poorest in the developed world. We come in last in math, in geography, in science.
You go to McDonald's and you see pictures of hamburgers and french fries on the keys and not numbers. I mean, that's a little bit scary sometimes.
Y plus y squared equals 13?
Americans seem ready at last to do something. The polls show that despite the sanctity of the neighborhood school, people would support some sort of national standards for educating their kids if that's what it takes.
15 grams.
The schools themselves, some of them, are at last trying to do things differently. For one thing, trading in those huge old factory schools for smaller ones. But there are those who think that even more important than what Americans finally do about their schools is the why. That it ought to be something larger than just keeping up with the kids in Tokyo or because it's good for business, something Jeffersonian.
I think that Jefferson had it right. There is no way that a democracy can succeed without an educated people.
Or as Jefferson himself put it, knowledge is power, knowledge is safety, knowledge is happiness. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, Charlottesville, Virginia.
And still to come on the CBS Evening News. Eric Ingberg on knowledge as job power as the old slow track speeds up. And Scott Pelley on charges that victims of the hurricane are getting help only in slow motion. Lobbying. The showdown vote in the House of Representatives expected tomorrow. Correspondent Bob Schieffer has the latest on the fight over President Bush's idea to cut the capital gains tax. What Mr. Bush insists will boost the economy, what opponents insist is really a straight-out tax break for the wealthiest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tax, 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 tax.
For a minute there, it sounded like the pressure was finally getting to Republican Paul Henry.
Tax, 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 tax.
It was a simple message, but probably as germane as anything else being said today.
Because the debate over the president's plan to cut the capital gains tax is no longer over policy, it's about power, prestige, and political hardball. And both sides have really turned up the heat.
The president promising a veto today unless he gets his way.
A vote against our capital gains position tomorrow will be a vote for a tax increase.
But Democrats who side with the president concede they've lost some ground.
I think the vote's going to be very, very close. The margin has narrowed, and the next 24 hours will tell the difference.
That's why junior congressmen like Democrat Jimmy Hayes are suddenly finding themselves so popular.
Yes, sir.
Democratic Majority Whip Bill Gray had a call into Hayes today within minutes after the Louisiana congressman had returned from a stroking session at the White House. And with both sides pulling out all the stops, you never knew whose name would be invoked as part of the scare tactics.
Leona Helmsley said taxes are for only little people. Is that what we're going to do in this chamber?
What you're dealing with on the Democratic side, on Gephardt's side, is son of Mondale. And the fact is, it is exactly the kind of tax increase Mondale promised in '84.
Tax, 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 tax.
That's the word, all right, and the issue is now considered so close that when it comes up in the House tomorrow, it could be decided by as few as 1 or 2 votes. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Clarence Wilson, a one-time top aide to former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Samuel Pierce, invoked his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination today and refused to tell what he knows. Pierce himself did the same yesterday when he appeared before the same investigators. This means that Pierce, Wilson, and another top former HUD official during the Reagan-Bush administration, Deborah Gore Dean, have now all refused to answer questions about accusations of mismanagement, corruption, and possible crime inside HUD in the 1980s. Japan's Sony Corporation announced today it is buying Columbia Pictures, the giant American film production company. Price tag, more than $3.5 billion. It's the largest ever Japanese acquisition in the United States.
Piloting a corporate jet for Dow can be interesting and rewarding, particularly when it's an Angel flight. The corporate Angel network uses empty seats on company business trips to fly cancer patients who need specialized treatment. Patients like Christy. Dow was the first to make over 100 of these flights.
Welcome aboard, Angel.
This company does great things. This is one of them.
Another day is turned to night. Close your eyes, say goodnight. Sweet dreams are on their way. All is well as you end the day. Sleep safe, sweet dreams, good night.
Sominex has the one ingredient doctors recommend most to help you fall asleep safely without worry. Sominex.
Good night.
What's that?
Common Sense Oat Bran.
Common sense should tell you it takes these 4 boxes to equal the vitamin and mineral nutrition in just 1 box of total. That's more nutrition than any other cereal.
Now that makes a whole lot of sense.
Quite
seats for Webb.
We interrupt this purchase for a reminder. The Discover card actually pays you cash back for every charge. It pays to Discover.
South Carolina's recovery from Hurricane Hugo is slow-go. Tens of thousands are still out of their homes. Hundreds of thousands still have no electricity and haven't had since the storm. Today, relief workers started handing out water, clothing, and other essentials in short supply. As Scott Pelley reports, there is no shortage of complaints that U.S. government help, and for that matter, state help, is not coming nearly fast enough.
Aid flooded into devastated coastal South Carolina today amid charges that a federal relief agency is holding up some badly needed assistance. Generators and portable housing have not been shipped, while the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, studies the area's needs, something critics argue is obvious.
This crowd's supposed to be geared up to get the help to the people, and they've absolutely been obstructionists.
This is a major crisis right now. You know, no need for them to debate about what they're going to do later. We need help now.
It is estimated 75,000 people lost their houses in the storm. But today, more than 800 federally owned house trailers remain parked outside Atlanta.
You tell me when the family comes in where the fastest way is to provide that mobile home, and I'll tell you when I'll put in my first request.
Local officials say ship now, count later.
There's plenty of great federal help. We need, however, to push the red tape process more quickly and cut it and get moving.
FEMA was involved in launching the Pentagon's highly praised efforts. The Charleston airlift began immediately, and today Marines armed with chainsaws liberated rural areas trapped in debris. Also, for the unemployed, the Labor Department approved overnight $5 million to hire cleanup workers. Most of the aid reaching the needy has come from the Red Cross and a loosely organized volunteer effort. Supplies are being shipped from across the nation.
Like everybody says, God bless America.
Officials of FEMA met with local authorities today to explain the paperwork necessary to receive federal funds. The agency says checks could be written in a few days, and equipment such as the generators and trailers may arrive next week. FEMA insists it is moving quickly, but for residents of Charleston, any delay is a long passage of time. Scott Pelley, CBS News, Charleston, South Carolina.
If you've got dental work, you've got 3 great reasons to chew Freedent. You know, Freedent won't stick to your dental work, and Freedent keeps your breath fresh. But maybe you didn't know Freedent moistens your mouth, too. So if you hate a dry mouth like I do, chew Freedent.
Freedent's the one that took the stick out of gum, and Freedent moistens your mouth. Yeah, moistens your mouth, and freshens your breath while you chew.
Non-stick Freedent moistens your mouth and freshens your breath.
It's happening now. The Crab Lovers Festival at Red Lobster. King crab from icy Arctic waters, steaming, succulent. Delicate snow crab to dip, drip, and savor. And now get your taste of our sweet, meaty Pacific Dungeness. We've created 8 crab and seafood combinations starting at just $6.95. They're here now and only at Red Lobster. Friday through Sunday, try our crab and shrimp special, just $10.95.
Trofeo. It's a new generation and we want a new horse.
Sequential port, fuel injection, anti-lock brakes.
Days come and we want a new horse.
Visual information center, handles great.
This Oldsmobile is not our father's.
New generation for the sons and daughters.
Trofeo. This is the new generation of Oldsmobile.
A twin-engine sightseeing plane crashed today near the Grand Canyon Airport in Arizona. The plane was attempting to land after a tour of the canyon when it clipped a utility pole, flipped over, and crashed. There were 21 people on board. 10 reportedly were killed, including the pilot and the co-pilot. 11 survivors were pulled from the wreckage and rushed to area hospitals. Cause of the crash, about 5 miles from the Grand Canyon itself, not yet known. In New York City today, a drug bust with a twist. federal agents seized 94-kilo packages of cocaine, many of them labeled Bush. Federal officials said they were unsure what the labels mean. 4 Colombians were seized along with the drugs. During today's question and answer session with reporters in the Oval Office, President Bush confirmed security has been increased for his children. But the president said he knew of no specific threat against them from the international cocaine cartel criminals.
To the degree security has been stepped up in accordance with the law on the Bush kids, it is not because of a specific hard piece of intelligence, hard threat. And I'm confident of that.
Dan. Reports of increased security for the Bush children surfaced 2 weeks ago. Mr. Bush was commenting on a published report today that the drug and violence merchants may have targeted one of the Bush children for a kidnap attempt. The latest in high-tech airport security systems was on display at New York's Kennedy Airport today, a $1 million machine capable of detecting even the plastic explosives that normal X-ray machines don't pick up. Among the many questions, disagreement over just how accurate these machines are. Also, who's going to pay for them? The FAA has ordered the airlines to install 150 of them. Over and over, we tell our children to get a good job, get a good education. But what kind of job? What kind of education? Correspondent Eric Ingberg reports tonight on one approach to meshing classroom training and job training. Schools to help students who might otherwise drop out, and U.S. businesses that need a new generation of qualified workers.
It's hardly a traditional classroom, but it is a high school class in training racehorses. The idea that high school is a good place to learn a marketable skill, especially for the 40% who don't go to college, is catching on with educators and business leaders increasingly worried about the declining quality of the American workforce.
We can't afford to lose anybody. If we lose a person, we're going to have to import someone to take that job or export that work out of the United States.
Courses on everything from air conditioning repair to floral design to wildlife management are being tried as innovative schools react to a changing economy.
Where vocational education once had a reputation as something of a dumping ground, today it's being looked at as the classroom of the future.
They're able to actually understand what they're studying rather than just memorize it for a test and then have no application to build upon later on.
So your solution should be...
Part of the new look in vocational education is heavy emphasis on basic classroom subjects like math and science, but to teach them in a way that stresses how the theories work on the job.
Well, I get to learn a trade and something that I can get a job in, so it makes me really want to come to school more.
Great Oaks, a 12-county vocational system outside Cincinnati, tailors academics so that auto mechanics focus on the physics of engines, dental technicians on the biology of teeth.
Also, they're all elongated. The dentist couldn't even use these, right?
Educators see job courses as a key to bringing down the dropout rate, which is highest among minorities.
Then I'm going to show you about rotating hazards from the tractor.
At Chicago's Agricultural Sciences High School, students, most of them blacks and Hispanics, prepare for jobs in food-related areas in this big farm state.
Yeah, most of you want to know how much you're going to get paid.
Basics such as how to apply for a job are stressed. The dropout rate is 0. The new watchword at vocational schools is flexibility. The curriculums are juggled to match the job market. Great Oaks did away with bricklaying courses during a housing slump, brought them back when construction recovered. Businesses are providing more dollars and expertise to the vocational schools. GE, which builds jet engines outside Cincinnati, helped design the Great Oaks curriculum. Auto dealer George Bush advises the school and hires 80% of his technicians from among its graduates.
We need technicians of all kinds. We're going to have to start them early, and we're going to have to find people that want this. And I can't think of a better place in the high school to start.
Advocates of the new style of vocational training say for too long, students who veer from the college-bound academic track have been stigmatized, treated as the forgotten half of our national student body.
I have friends who make fun of me because I'm in vocational school, but really the laugh's on them because they're still in the academic high schools, and when I get out of here, I'll be ready to go right to work.
We can't afford to have it as a dumping ground anymore. It's got to provide
that human resource, that manpower that we need for our economy.
Analysts predict that the average worker of the future will change jobs 5 or 6 times as technology advances. Educators say the challenge will be to mix job training with sound academic background so the next generation can handle jobs that may not even exist today. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Hamilton County, Ohio.
And that's part of our world tonight. Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News. See you tomorrow. Good night.
Tomorrow on CBS This Morning, the controversial comedian Jackie Mason, also Football Hall of Famer, now author Gail Sayers, and Ted Shackelford from Knott's Landing on CBS This Morning. This is CBS.
Just ahead on 11 News, youth gangs battle it out in